For 2022 and early part of 23, we've had a lot of discussion about domestic terrorist attacks on the electric grid. What I'd like to try and do today as a student of critical infrastructure is to offer you an insight into the electric grid and the substations in the United States, and also give you a sense of what's being done by the federal government, and in one state in particular, state of California. Anyway, again, I've been a student of critical infrastructure. I've also done inspections at multiple substations in North America. And I think I'd like to just share with you some more information as part of this YouTube series. Let's go ahead and move on. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with this PowerPoint presentation I put together regarding the attacks on the U.S. electric grid substations. So essentially in the news, we have a variety of headlines that you can see. I've just thrown up a couple. And here in Washington State, where I live, we had an example in December where two men were out shooting at substations with the intention of turning off power so they could rob different businesses in the area. These were rural substations, and but they were able to do the shooting. I don't know if they were effective in the robbing or not, but that was their intent. We also have another example from an indictment from the Southern District of Ohio, where they had arrested three men who were basically going to do attacks on the substations to turn off the power grid as part of a domestic terrorism scheme. The top right-hand corner, we have an example where there's a woman and another man were arrested because they were neo-Nazis and they were going to turn off the grid in the Baltimore area in order to do and basically cause chaos and cause problems and maybe do thefts and so forth. Anyway, the point is this is it's another example. And even in CNN down here, there was an example where they were talking about the news in general. So let's take a closer look at this issue just so you can understand it. We'll go from there. So for background, we have about 7,300 power plants in the United States and about 55,000 electric substations. Now, a couple things about substations. First, you're separated into two different types. There are transmission voltage substations, which are the higher voltage ones, and then the distribution substations, which are those that are mainly used for towns, small businesses, etc. And the smaller substations step down the power from the voltage from the transmission grid to be able to be used in a home or a business. Now, most of the distribution substations are in rural areas. They're not well guarded. They're basically a fence, and that's about it. And also, they are not covered by federal security requirements as far as substations. Now, I'll get into that in just a minute. Now, I've already shown you some headlines. Here's a couple other examples just to make my point. And these are attacks or attempts that are essentially from those who you consider domestic terrorists. In May of 2020, there was an attempt in the Las Vegas area where some people were going to turn off the grid by attacking substations in order to provoke violence during the Black Lives Matter protests. And during all the chaos of not having power and so forth, this particular group was going to basically cause chaos, try and make their point that they were racially motivated and so forth. In August 2021, another example is in North Carolina. Now, this is separate from the attacks that we heard about in the news. in November, December. But there were some neo-Nazis who were basically going to, quote, create general chaos and provide cover and ease of escape, where they planned to perform assassinations to form a white ethno-state. So that's another theme that you want to get a sense of. And in 2022, there were over 100 incidents alone on attacks on substations from January to August. Now, understand some of these attacks are literally just a bored hunter out in the backwoods decides to take a shot at a substation. That's one of the examples, all right? But on the other hand, there are other types of incidents where, as I've shown, that there are basically terrorists who are trying to take advantage of shutting down power in order to make their point. So what's being done about this threat? What I'd like to do is turn the clock back to April 16th, 2013, and give you a sense of some history that might help you. Okay, let's talk about what happened on April 16th, 2013. There's a large substation, transmission substation called Metcalf, and it's located near San Jose in California. And on that date, somebody went ahead and attacked that, physically attacked that substation. Now, it's a big substation. It's both 500,000 volts and 230 kilovolts. And somebody decided to shoot at the transformers and some circuit breakers. There's 116 impact points on 22 pieces of equipment. They had a large leak of the 52,000 gallons of mineral oil that came out of the transformers. And in case you're wondering why, is the mineral oil is used to cool the transformers. And anyway, this appeared to be a very unusually well-informed attack. First of all, it appears that fiber lines were cut before the attack, and those fiber lines were used to send communications back to the control center. So that was cut. The telecom vaults were resealed, and there was trash spread around in order to basically let people think that nothing had changed. The attackers left the scene before the law enforcement arrived. They only shot at the transformers that were in operation. One was down for maintenance. So in summary, the damage that was identified following the shooting was 10 transformers were shot, 7 transformers were shot in the 230 kilovolt yard, 6 circuit breakers were shot in the 115 kilovolt yard. I talked about the 52,000 gallons of oil. The restoration costs, as you can see, were about $15.4 million, and it took 27 days to restore the substation. So what happened? There was a regulatory response from both the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and also from the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. Now, you may not have heard of these organizations, but FERC is a federal entity. They are basically overseeing the energy operations in the United States. And they have an entity called NERC, which basically enforces the rules, establishes the rules in some respects, and so forth. It's normally a very slow, methodical process. Well, when the attack on Metcalf occurred in 2013, FERC got very excited, mainly because the federal government got excited, and a lot of congressmen did. And they went ahead and established a requirement to NERC to put together some rules to protect transmission grid substations. So as a result, there was an edict on March 7th to NERC. NERC went ahead and jumped through a lot of hoops and did a lot of things, and finally put together what's called the CIP, so it's Critical Infrastructure Protection Standard 014 for substation physical security, which went into effect for all U.S. electric utilities on October 1st, 2015. Now you might say, well, gee, that's awfully slow. Well, not exactly. Relative to the regulatory responses from NERC and FERC previously, this was really fast. And a key point I want to raise out of this is that when NERC put together this request for standards, this is what their focus was. It was to identify and protect facilities that, if rendered inoperable or damaged, could result in widespread instability, uncontrolled separation, or cascading within a transmission interconnection. Keyword: transmission. So remember, the distribution substations are not included in this. Well, our friends at the state of California decided to take action in this space. In June of 2015, as a result of Metcalf, and remember, Metcalf occurred in the state of California, the state of California put together what's essentially called, it started out as Senate Bill 699 for physical security of critical distribution substations. And they put together this law or legislation, and essentially it directed the California Public Utilities Commission to look at policies and practices related to physical security of electric distribution assets, not cyber, and told the commission to consider adoption of new standards and rules to address any physical security risk to the distribution system of California's electric corporations, so to ensure high quality, safe, and reliable service. Okay, so they moved forward, they put together this rule, and they came up with ultimately a decision that came out of the CPUC, the California Public Utility Commission, and it made California the first state, and to my knowledge, the only state in the U.S. to adopt rules to guard electric distribution grid against attack. So, and this was, again, distribution. And what they did is they put together two interesting aspects that I actually had an opportunity to work with a utility in California to help them with this particular work. And we'll talk about it in just a second. So what they did is they put together two phases of approach. And they said, okay, first of all, we want you to go through all of your distribution facilities and identify those that have, I'm looking at the left-hand side, that have the distribution facility that is needed for what's called crank path black start restoration of regional grid. That's a little bit technical for a transmission discussion or electric grid discussion. It's a source for a military installation. It serves regional water and wastewater. It serves regional public safety, so like think fire 911 centers, police departments. It serves a major transportation facility like an airport. Serves a level 1 trauma center and has over 60,000 meters. In other words, there's 60,000 customers, so to speak. All right. And what you do is you go through and identify all this by looking at who your distribution substations are, where they're located, etc. Then you do the assessment phase, which is the right-hand side. And the assessment phase is basically looking at such things as what about current resiliency? We may already have it. For example, a hospital might have 2 feeds from the electric grid plus a diesel generator, so maybe that's not as weak as compared to another hospital which doesn't. Okay. Spare assets, so that will be things such as do I have spare circuit breakers, transformers? Transformers are very hard to come by the way. They aren't, you just don't buy them off the shelf at Home Depot. What about existing physical security protections? Do I have cameras? Do I have lights? Do I have electrified fences and so on? Potential for emergency responders to identify and respond to attacks. So for example, remember I talked about these substations are located in rural areas. Well, if they're located in a rural area, how long does it take the police and first responders to get there? Is it an hour? Is it 90 minutes or is it only 30 minutes or 20 minutes? That can make the evaluation have an impact. Also, location and proximity to gas pipelines, geographical challenges, impacts of weather, and so forth. And what's the history of criminal activity? Do you have a particular substation that has always been shot at? Well, anyway, the answer was state of California did a great job on this, but it only applied to three utilities. It only applied to Pacific Gas and Electric, Southern California Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric, because they're all regulated by the California Public Utility Commission. But a lot of other utilities, such as public utility districts, municipal utilities, and so forth, they aren't covered by the California rule. So that good practice is still only restricted to three or so utilities. Well, anyway, the point is we still have weaknesses. And I'm reiterating that the distribution substations are not covered by NERC SIP 14. They're in rural areas, we already got that, and only California has this restriction. So I teasingly put together this picture here, Mind the Gap, even though it's from London probably, to basically say that the utilities need to pay attention to this, and the states, and the state regulators, as well as the federal regulators. And that was shown in Washington State and North Carolina and Oregon most recently. So again, I'm going to go back. Who wants to attack the electric grid? There's really a variety of players, but there were a couple interesting reports that came out of the FBI and also the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness. And essentially, this will give you a list of who they see as those who are trying to do the attacks. Right-wing extremists, domestic terror groups, homegrown violent extremists, white racially motivated extremists, black racially motivated extremists, abortion-related extremists, both pro and pro-choice, anarchists, anti-government, private militias, and sovereign citizen extremists. Anyway, the point I'm trying to raise here is that there's a whole lot of people who are looking at the electric grid as an attack. And interestingly enough, even the state of New Jersey's report said they had very little evidence of expectations for a foreign attack on the U.S. electric grid. Doesn't mean it's not there. It's just basically low probability. So what's the call to action from all this? Realizing that the people watching my YouTube may not be policymakers, but they might be influencers. And what I'd like to say is, number one is be aware of your surroundings. Watch the news. Pay attention to what's going on at the substations near your home. And do you even know where your power comes from? Also, one thing is that I may be talking about specifically to attacks on the electric grid, but what about attacks on natural gas compressor stations or water supply systems and components? So you really need to kind of wrap your mindset around all critical infrastructure, not just electric grid. And then, of course, lastly is if you see something, say something, and then call your local authorities. Well, thanks for taking time today to watch this video. I hope you learned something. I hope this gave you some ideas on what the concerns are relative to attacks on the electric grid. They are real. And most of all, I just want to thank you for your time. Please offer any comments you might have, thoughts below on the video, and also please like and subscribe. Thanks again, and I hope to have a video out again next week.